Welcome to Inclusion Revolution here on Eastlink Television. We're really pleased you can join us again this week to really identify and look into different disability issues that are faced by our community. We're very, very lucky this week to have Dr. Bruce Mills joining us to talk about the issue of self-advocacy. In addition to being a PhD, Dr. Mills is also the founding president of Reach Canada, as well as Reachability here in Nova Scotia. He's an accomplished musician, published author, and he has this really long CV, but I'm not willing to read it, so we're just going to run with that. Welcome, Dr. Mills.
Thank you, Tova. I'm glad to be here.
I know you don't mind if I call you Bruce,
no,
so we'll continue that way.
I actually prefer Bruce. Thank you.
Okay, it takes too long for me to say Dr. Mills. Dr. Mills, haha, just kidding. Bruce, can you tell us a little bit, first of all, what is self-advocacy? I mean, let's define it so we're all talking about the same thing.
Advocacy in itself is a capacity or a resource that people have whereby they can access new information that gives them power over circumstances in their lives. It gives them control over problems, control over situations. Self-advocacy, of course, is the capacity to be able to do that for yourself, to be able to access resources that will enable you to take control of a situation, of a difficult situation, most of the time.
Right. Now, we talk a lot about self-advocacy in the disability community because we believe it's so important for individuals who often feel helpless to some extent in terms of what process they need to go through or how to get what they need, how to advocate for themselves. And that's why it's something that I think is especially important for persons with disabilities. Clearly, self-advocacy is good for everybody. We should all be able to advocate on our own behalf. But in the case of persons with disabilities, often the process is very convoluted, or perhaps the person with the disability has a hard time with documentation or paperwork based on their disability, if it's perhaps cognitive. And the question really is, why is self-advocacy such a particularly important issue for persons with disabilities, and why is it such a challenge? I mean, I've touched on it, but from your perspective.
You half answered your own question.
I do that a lot, I'm sorry.
I think the difficulty in the context of disability and advocacy is what you've described as this sense of helplessness, this perceived helplessness. And I want to stress that helplessness is pretty much a perceived helplessness. It's not that people are in reality actually helpless. So when we perceive that we're helpless, we feel that there's nothing we can do to be able to take control over our own situations. In fact, we are not ever helpless. We do have access to information and resources that can enable us to take control over the situations that actually are making us feel helpless.
So in other words, the person who says, I'd love to advocate on my own behalf, but I can't, in your mind, that person isn't necessarily looking where they need to look, or maybe looking hard enough, or reaching out enough, because ultimately they can help themselves. Everybody can to some degree.
Everybody can help themselves to some degree.
Okay.
And I think it's important that people know that just to go back another step, that the helplessness that you're talking about that says, I can't do anything for myself, is a perception. It's not the truth. When we talk about accessing resources to contradict or to replace or displace that sense of perceived helplessness, we're talking about accessing information sometimes, developing new knowledge, developing self-awareness, developing awareness about your disability or your disease. That can be knowledge, new information. It could be as simple as getting in touch with other people, like the people at Reachability, who perhaps could facilitate the development of new information and new knowledge for the individual. Or it could be joining groups, for example, cancer support groups or various disabilities. Almost every disability has an organization that represents it in Canada. For example, the Canadian Paraplegic Association, the Canadian Arthritis Society, for example. All of these organizations provide, at the very minimum, information and resources, new knowledge.
Knowledge is power.
Research.
You've said that many times.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So we clearly see the first step, in a sense, as you put it, the first step is understanding that you aren't helpless. and really understanding that. And, you know, we have a confidence building program that we run at Reachability. And one of the things I find interesting is how many people come in on the Monday and we ask, well, what are your skills and your strengths? And they'll say none, nothing. And we all have skills and strengths. And to hear people say nothing, you can really hear that helplessness or given up kind of mentality. And what we find is at the end of the week, all of a sudden, you know, there's all these skill sets they understand they have, how they could help them, and that helpless piece starts to slowly drift away. So I really do have to say I see a lot of people being held back first and foremost by that belief there's nothing they can do. So having said that, and having had you clearly make the statement, and I agree with you completely, we're not as helpless certainly as we feel, and often there's a minimal step or two to take to feel more empowered.
Can we just say that the beginning to self-empowerment, to the process of advocating, to the process of developing the capacity to advocate on behalf of your own self, your own interests, must begin with self-awareness. And when you talk about your programs at Reachability, that Monday to Friday kind of continuum, I think that self-awareness might be lacking when the individual first steps in the door, when the individual first begins the program. Self-awareness builds during those 5 days. But it must begin with self-awareness. It may begin with something as simple as, I have a problem.
Right.
I feel stupid. I feel helpless. I don't think I have the ability or the strength or the skills to help myself.
And I hear that all the time, Bruce. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today, because one of the most common things I hear when clients call me, or even employers contact me through my disability awareness training, and actually say to me, I have employees who feel helpless. And when I ask them what they need, they say, forget it. So even when they're being approached to some extent, I'm hearing that. So my question is, we need to overcome the helplessness by a level of self-awareness. I get that. So the next question is, now what? Let's assume that we've been able to provide people with a little bit of self-awareness. What I'd like to know is, now what?
The question always is, where do I turn now? Who can I talk to? Where can I access information that can help me develop the knowledge I need to empower my own life? Very, very often, I think it comes from peer-on-peer kinds of interactions, of knowing other individuals that are in similar or exactly the same circumstances that you're in, and seeing how they've been able to empower their lives.
Right, which takes us back to your idea, which is to contact agencies. So, for instance, if I'm a person who lives with Asperger's or a form of autism, and I want more information or maybe support in how to advocate better for myself, I might first start at the Autism Society and find out a little bit about what they can do to support and help me learn more about what I need to do. You
may also be able to identify peers in the community who you possibly could identify as a role model.
Right.
Looking for the kinds of leadership in your communities that are kind of trendsetters, or people that have made a difference, not just in the areas of disability and advocacy, but in the areas of achieving some measure of success in their lives, regardless of what the handicaps or disabilities could potentially be.
And we find those people, obviously, well, you know, through newspaper articles and reading, and of course those of us who have access to the internet. It certainly is a great equalizer in terms of information for persons with all types of disabilities. So you're reaching out and you're looking. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of the next thing to do. So I've got a sense of self-awareness. I have a sense that I've got to do more, and I'm not going to be this victim. And I think that's something that's important to me to see people take on. I refuse to be victimized further. I want to take a stand, and I want to get resources. And your next step is to look at a peer and to perhaps find almost a role model that you can say, you know, I like the way they've handled that, or I like the way they've achieved what they need, and now it's my turn to sort of take that message on. So what I'd like to do when we return from our break is to talk a little bit about that next move, which is I've perhaps got the confidence and I've got the understanding I can do it. but now what? So when we return to Inclusion Revolution with Dr. Bruce Mills, we're going to speak a little bit more about how to be the best self-advocate you can be, because it's a necessary skill, and everyone, not just persons with disabilities, should understand all about self-advocacy. We'll be right back.